All right. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Jasmine Sherman. Jasmine is running for president as an independent for 2024. Jasmine, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me. Oh my gosh. And I loved your intro. I saw so many people that I actually do know. Especially recently, I saw Afeni up there. She is so awesome. Have you heard her speak?
Yeah. Feeney was a part of RBN. So yeah, she's great. She's awesome. But I want to get started discussing your campaign. So you're running for president as an independent. First and foremost, why did you decide to run for president?
So I do not appreciate how there are people who are living in this country without housing, healthcare, education. I work in Charlotte, North Carolina for a nonprofit that I own to provide people who are houseless with resources. And when I contacted our city to buy an old jail to convert it into housing, they wouldn't sell it to me. They wanted to sell it to a developer. Then I contacted our city council and our county commissioners about, okay, you don't want to sell me the jail, sell me this old school. They wouldn't sell me that either. And finally, I went to the mayor, the governor, and no one wanted to end houselessness in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the fastest way for me to end houselessness in this country is to run for president and write an executive order to do so.
Awesome. Yeah, we've talked about the housing issue.
It sounds old.
Yeah, we've talked about the housing issue a lot on this show. I want to bring up your website here. So it says, Jasmine Sherman for president, let's reset. And I want to go to your platform here. And so I like a lot of the policies that you laid out. And one of the first one that I saw here was a disability policy. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why did you decide to put that on your platform? Because right now I think you're the only candidate that has a policy in reference to disability.
So the problem is we have a society that has a whole population of people that are left out and disenfranchised. Some of the people who are suffering the greatest abuses in our country are the disabled. And people do not understand that the disabled are not just people who are visibly disabled in a wheelchair, or like disability looks very different on different people. But we need to go ahead and provide an environment that is conducive for all of our citizens. And so that means that we need wheelchairs that fit every size. We need to make sure that things are accessible. Right now, when you walk around, there are neighborhoods that do not have sidewalks. And because people who are disabled are disenfranchised this way, they suffer the most abuses. And so I am going to acknowledge that I do have mobility issues of my own. So it is, something that I also think is important. But a lot of the people that I have been working with, they need this to survive. And we need to make sure that people are okay.
That's right. So this is one of the issues I think oftentimes is overlooked, is the disability issue. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that not everyone has a physical disability. So this idea that you can just look at someone and tell whether or not they're disabled, that's actually not true. You mentioned wheelchairs. I had a friend who used to work with medical equipment. And one of the things that she brought to my attention is how expensive wheelchairs are, and the mobile scooters that you guys may see sometimes. If you go to the grocery store, you may see people using a mobile scooter. Those scooters not only are very expensive, but they're also very difficult to get, whether you qualify for it or not. So she opened my eyes to a lot of these issues. But I love the fact that you do have a policy in reference to disability, because I do feel like oftentimes this is a group of people that are often forgotten about.
But because they're forgotten about, this impacts our children's education as well, right? So disabilities, there are children that are disabled, and because we don't have the resources and proper funding, they are also being harmed. And so their disability is being compounded because we have not addressed children's disabilities either. A lot of my platform, just to be transparent, a lot of my platform, the reason it's called Let's Reset is we have to go ahead and fix a bunch of stuff. Quick, I'm gonna watch my mouth. We have to fix a bunch of things together. A lot of my programs are layered in, right? That's the only way that we will get this. So we have to fix disability, but because we're fixing people's disability issues, we have to make sure we fix education, right? And because we're fixing education, and disability, we have to fix the infrastructure. So that means that, like, sidewalks and those things, those are all a requirement of that. It's all very much interlocked. As we started digging into one thing, we found another thing, and they're all intersect.
Yeah, I want to mention that this is important for people to understand. One of the schools that I actually used to do my volunteering with, when I was, especially when I was starting to go into like the clinical assessment for my graduate program, one of the schools that I did my observations at actually did not have a ramp or any type of wheelchair access to the school. It was an old building in Boston. They never upgraded it for people who may have to have a ramp to get into the building, people who use a wheelchair. So if you have any type of physical handicap where you are wheelchair bound, you have no way of entering that building because you have to walk up a flight of steps just to get in through the front door. So that's not uncommon with some of these older buildings here in places like New England, but those are the kind of things that need to change. And that is a part of infrastructure. So you're right. They all do intersect. Another policy you have here is public utility conversion policy. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I do not think the average American in 2024, 2025, 2023 should be paying utility bills. We have enough technology to provide people with water and electricity and Wi-Fi, because that is also a utility now, for free. Right? The taxpayers have already invested all of this money into the infrastructure. And what we did was we took taxpayer money and then gave it to corporations to profit off of. There is no reason that we are still charging people for utility bills, especially as the water isn't clean, the electricity isn't reliable in some places. In Appalachia, they don't even have the internet. Like, these are things that have to be fixed. And the best way to do that is to stop relying on local government that clearly has not taken care of all our citizens. I saw in your chat, someone commented, we were talking about the disability in Boston. When I lived in Dorchester, there's a walk up. I lived on a three-floor walk up. You know what I'm saying? The power would go out. There's no wheelchair access. There's no elevator. These are all things that we have to fix. And charging people utilities is how we stop them from having air conditioning when it's hot, how we stop them from using their heat when it's cold. Eliminating those bills will go ahead and provide everyone with the same kind of comfort. We're getting to a place where if you are someone that doesn't acknowledge climate change, I can't help you. But if everybody else is paying attention, our planet is getting hotter. We have record heat. People are passing away from that. And because people are more concerned of, if I have to pay my utilities, I can't buy groceries. So let's just make sure we put it in our taxes and call it a day and cover it for people.
Yeah. So the state of Maryland, for those who are not aware, my dad was telling me about this years ago. They actually started to make it illegal to basically, turn off someone's heat in the winter for non-payment. Because what was happening is you had senior citizens who were living off of their Social Security check, and it wasn't enough to pay the heating bills sometimes. So they were like, they would die in their home. So this is a big issue in reference to when we talk about utilities. Like, a lot of people don't understand that. Environment and infrastructure policy. Let's talk a little bit about this one.
So we have to completely revamp our infrastructure and our environment. I don't know where everybody's from, but I do know that everybody knows that there are potholes where they live. There are roads that are cracked. There are sidewalks that are either unbuilt or unkempt. That's part of our infrastructure. Instead, what we need to do is go ahead, because I did talk about, this is my environmental plan. What our goal is, in places that don't have sidewalks, we're going to go ahead and install sidewalks with kinetic pads. So that helps to generate that energy that we were talking about for the public free utilities, right? By doing that, that helps us. By not relying on fossil fuels anymore, there are natural AC methods that countries within the continent of Africa are already using to keep people cool. We have better technology. Unfortunately, our government has not chosen to invest in us locally or federally to provide for our safety or our infrastructure. I grew up in New York and Boston a little bit, and people would fall through potholes, people fall through grates, and then they would be stuck. Now they have no way to get around, right? So we have to fix our environment. It's like, I don't know how you guys felt about that rolling cloud that came from Canada because of the fires, but that's not
Yep.
safe. That's not healthy. That's coming because our planet is getting hotter, right? We have other technologies. One of the things that we are going to be doing when I'm elected is putting in a rail system from the East Coast to the West Coast. That policy isn't there yet because we are not done with the models about how to do that and legally do that, because you have to take the old Amtrak rails. But once that is done, that policy will be up there as well. We have to do something to keep our planet cooler and provide people with access. Another big thing about our infrastructure policy is because we'd be federally funding this, we would go back to mixed walkable neighborhoods. A lot of people don't live in places where they can go and get all of their needs met in their community, and it's hurting us. It's stopping us from building a community because we're not connected.
That's right. You're right. 100% correct about that. Abolish the police policy. So this is one that we've talked about often on RBN. Nick is a part of 10 Demands for Justice, and he talks about the road to abolition. Let's get a little bit into this one, because I think when some people hear abolish police, particularly those who have property and those who tend to be a lot older than us, they get a little bit concerned. Let's talk a little bit about abolish the police.
So what we've done is abolish the police. That line item would go to zero, no more funding for it. And we would be paying people to participate in their own community task force. Everybody has that one nosy neighbor who knows everything about what's going on better than anybody else. Why pay a stranger who doesn't live in that zip code when we could pay the people who live in that community to police that community? You know all the kids in that community. You will never have a mistake of, what are you doing here? If you don't live here, you shouldn't be policing here. And for people who are like, well, what about the cops? They can go and work on their own community task force within their own zip codes. But we need to make sure we get to a place where we, one, stop this senseless killing of innocent people, because cops were never supposed to be judge, jury, and executioner. And that's what's happened. We can no longer. That culture is so toxic. We must abolish the police and put the power in the citizens' hands.
Jasmine, what happened to
and it saves us money because we're not paying for it.
Is neighborhood watch no longer a thing? When I was growing up, there used to be neighborhood watch, but I don't see those signs that much anymore.
So George Zimmerman was neighborhood watch, right? So that's kind of like, so that it does exist, but not like that. This is what we're talking, like when we talk about a community task force, we're talking about you're going out with a social worker automatically on calls. You are the individual in your community. It shouldn't be that hard, and this is going to sound bad, but we all do understand how to talk to our drunk neighbor, right? Come on, Joe, you do this like that kind of thing. But the difference here is you're not just dropping Joe in a drunk take. Now you're taking Joe home. And then when we contact Joe on 2 days from now, hey, you had an incident the other night, we've got to talk about that. We go to a restorative justice policy. Why is Joe getting drunk? Why is he acting like that? What is missing? A lot of times people go, I just want justice. I just want to lock them up. You talked about elderly people being concerned, but what is this happening, right? If we eliminate poverty, a lot of the crime goes away. If we provide people with universal health care for mental health treatment, now they have access, right? And so part of our Abolish Police policy relies on giving people the skills they need to be a successful community. We have to go from trying to punish people and get revenge, because that is not working. We have enough data to show it's not a deterrent and it isn't helping. But other countries, other people who have different methods of helping to keep people safe have found that there are better ways of doing it. And we would just be adopting what the data shows works.
So this next one here was pretty shocking to me. We're going to use the term assault because it's YouTube. Anti-legalized child assault policy. I didn't even know this was a thing.
So not only is it a thing, this policy now has to be expanded. I do not know if you have done your research on cults, but I did tell you I have a nonprofit. I deal with houselessness. I deal with children that are trafficked. One time a woman came and she was like, I just escaped my pimp. They have my child. We called the police. Not that I like to work with them, but we needed to get this woman her child. And the police tried to arrest this victim, my client, for being a prostitute. And I'm sorry, can I say that on YouTube? I'm so sorry. A sex worker, instead of worrying about the child. Children in this country are swapped on Facebook, on napkins. Like, you just have to say, I'm a parent, I'm signing them over, and you do. We must make it. If you are not old enough to vote, you are not old enough to get married. This should no longer be a thing, because a child of 12 cannot consent. And we have a big problem with cults in our country under religion, where a child at 12 is considered an adult. And so this
Okay,
policy does need to be expanded.
that kind of reminds me of Waco. That kind of reminds
It's
me
worse
of,
than
of
Waco.
Waco.
Yeah, it's Waco, it's ATI, it's IBPL. It's a lot of these religious groups that are marrying children off. And I will be candid. I was a foster child in Boston. I didn't get my first SA until I went to foster care. And I want to ensure that that doesn't happen to any other human in our country.
Mhm.
It's you. If you listen to these stories, it is gross. And not to be funny, Massachusetts is a state where it is okay at 12. It's still on the books with parental consent. So I'm gonna get some water. Sorry about that. I have a real problem with that. And so that is why, because of this, we also need to gut the foster care and the adoption system as well. Like, that's why I say it's a my slogan and policy is let's reset, because we know all the cracks. We have the technology to track everything that has gone wrong. This is our time to redo it. Do a whole new social contract in this country, one that is inclusive and protects everyone.
Well said, Jasmine. Well said. Now we get into the foster care and adoption policy. So this is again, like, you're the first person I've seen so far that has this on their platform. And this is a huge issue because for people who are just not aware, not everyone who's a foster parent actually wants to be a parent. Some parents will sign up to be a foster parent just to get the money from the state and then not even spend the money on that child. And yes, there are social
Correct.
workers who come to visit the house to check on the child, but all the parent has to do is to put enough fear in the child not to speak out about what they're doing to them or how they're neglecting them. And of course, they are in a position of authority. So the child is going to fear the parents. They also don't want to be put back into the system again and have to go somewhere else that could be even worse than where they are now. But this is a misstepped a lot of times by social workers, because from what I understand, these visits usually are, I think, announced, or they can prepare for these. It's not
Correct.
like they're showing
The
up
visit,
like out of the blue.
correct. And they don't do surprise checks. But I want to be fair. The social workers do not have the capacity. They're overworked and underpaid, right? Like,
Mm.
as much of the blame is on them, much of it is not. It's on the system itself. When it comes to the foster care problem, I think what we have to acknowledge is we do not have sex education in this country, not one that's consistent across the board. And so a child who is in a foster home, if it's normal, right? Like, I was a child that grew up with my parents spanked me. It wasn't until after I went into foster care, I was like, oh, people don't spank their kids. A kid does not know what is not normalized. So even if you're in foster care, depending on how young that child is, that child doesn't know why they're in foster care, right? Like, I went to foster care because my dad was a drug dealer, not because of like, they did add child abuse later, but so sometimes the kids don't even know what it is to communicate that to their social worker, so like, it's a terrible thing, but it is normalized. It is something that you don't understand. And then other kids are your peer pressures. Like, this is what we do to survive. You know what I'm saying? I think we have to make space for social workers to do their job, but we also have to provide our potential victims with
Mm. Well said. Well said. Yeah, that one is a huge issue. There was a girl when I was in high school, one of my classmates was actually in a group home, and we didn't know that for the longest time until one day she came to class like just crying because she couldn't take it anymore because she told us about what was happening to her in the group home. And I just thought to myself, like, wow, like, no one should have to go through this. Decriminalize sex work policy. This is another big issue, I think, that, in some countries this is legal, but not so much in the United
it's
States. Let's
legal
talk a
here
little bit about
depending on
this.
so it's legal here depending on the bylaws that you follow. So like in Connecticut, you can do it at a bar, right? Like, every state has their own thing, but it's called something specific. And in New York, there was an issue with police officers who had to be told they can no longer have SA with the women that they were arresting for doing this by decriminalizing, because we had all of these policies. We interviewed professionals, people within the industry, doctors, everybody to give us, plus lawyers, lots of lawyers, to help us write these policies. And we met with sex workers and they told us what they needed. And decriminalization is the best way to free them from oppressive exploitation, provide them with health care and safety, and stop, again, law enforcement from abusing them. After you get abused by someone else, it's very easy for someone else now to prey upon you. Another thing
Right.
that I will be doing that is not there is we are going to test every SA kit in the United States of America. That is going to be a prime objective. We need to know who is safe, who is not safe, and then begin to get their victims the support that they need.
Well, something I never really understood, why is it okay or why is it legal for someone to be a porn star, for example, to get paid for having sex, but it's not nationally, it's not legal for someone to be uh a call girl or something like that. I never
Right. So
understood
a
that.
lot of we have a lot of blue laws on the books, right? So when porn like got really big, it was only in California and New York for the filming, right? Those states that were liberal and took those blue laws off the books. Depending on where you live right now in the United States, living with a person that you're not married to could get you arrested. And I would like to tell people, do not sleep on those blue laws, because currently, under the whole guise of removing an individual who carries children's reproductive freedom, they are trying to enact a law from 150 years ago. So those are very important, and that's how you got it. And so once we had the internet and things like that, they just started to make pornography much easier to have access to.
Mhm.
But when they did open those theaters, people were arrested in the red light district of New York and in California originally. Harry
Interesting.
Flint was arrested several times too.
That's interesting. Tax policy and plan. So this is a biggie. Uh, I think a lot of us don't like
This one is a biggie.
high
It's like
taxes.
36 pages. But it's actually very simple. This one's like a 10-minute explanation, but less. In a Sherman administration, if you make under $40,000, you will not pay taxes. You would also no longer be doing your own taxes. It would be done quarterly by your employer, because they're the people that snitch on you anyway, right? Like the government knows you owe, they already know, right? So why make you do it? Right now they do it because we have deals with TurboTax. We have deals with H&R Block. And I have to tell you, corporations are not my priority. People are. So let's go ahead and eliminate potential for tax fraud by stopping allowing people to do their own taxes. We switch from a Hayek model to a Keynesian model, which means that we are going to put the money in the hands of the public, which is why we also provide them with universal basic income as well. But if you make under $40,000, you would not pay taxes. If you click on it, there is a chart that shows people exactly where they fall. There's no exceptions. Taxes are not done as a family anymore. It's an individual one-for-one situation.
Interesting. And then the only question I have in reference to this that I think some people are going to ask, what about people that are self-employed?
People that are self-employed will be given access to the Social Security website where they'll be able to file those for free, because the self-employed person is still a company. They would be doing it because that's not them being an individual, that's them being a corporation. So they would be doing their business tax for their employees, i.e. them. But we would provide them with the software to do it.
Okay. Social Security policy.
So this one, I'm not going to get a lot of fans here. I am eliminating Social Security for anyone that is not disabled.
Oh, dear.
Because it takes money out of the pockets of the young to halfway support the elderly. But again, my platform is housing, healthcare, and education. So people who are no longer getting Social Security will be getting universal basic income, which is more than they're currently receiving on Social Security.
Interesting. Some of us may not get Social Security anyway, like, to be honest, by the time we're
correct, which is why because it is cheaper, it is more expensive, not cheaper. It is more expensive to be disabled. We would not be cutting off SSDI for people with disabilities. But when you apply for disability, you would get it on the first try. No more letting people die waiting for them to apply 3 or 4 times.
So the only thing I will say in reference to replacing this with a UBI is that for elderly people that are retired, that UBI isn't going to go as far for them as it would for someone who's employed.
What do you mean? Because it's not determined by your age. it's determined by where you live, and it's based on the index of where you are. So as things change, if Walmart raises their prices, they have to raise their wages, which means that we'd have to raise the universal basic income. What we have to stop doing is have a minimum wage and have an index living wage that fluctuates.
That's interesting. What about the universal healthcare policy?
It includes dental, vision, mental health care, and respite care. If you open that policy, you will see that there is a link in there to takes you to a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet lets you see all of the programs that we are going to be closing to pay for this policy. What we have to do is put a health facility in every zip code. Every zip code. Right now, there are people who live in the United States in counties that have no hospitals. None. And not to be funny, we do not have the same kind of care. If you got hurt in Boston, you would feel very different versus if you get hurt in Alabama. And that's
true.
not okay. We have to have a standard of living that is fair. If I get hurt in Easter peepee, I want to make sure that I'm still going to be okay. And right now, we don't have that.
That is true. I think people have to understand, especially those that live in like rural areas. Like there are rural areas in this country that don't have hospitals anymore. The hospitals have closed, or there are some that do have hospitals, but the hospitals are not to the same quality as hospitals here in Massachusetts. And everybody should have that same quality. You shouldn't have to live in Massachusetts to have a good doctor. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it.
I agree. Because, like, not to be funny, I travel. I don't want to be getting hurt.
Right. And I think, this is a big one. I think at this point, it's a no-brainer because obviously Bernie Sanders ran on this. A lot of people are very passionate about universal health care. Everybody needs to have health care in this country. Guaranteed housing
But I'm
policy.
the only candidate that I just want to say, though, I'm the only candidate that is including dental and vision in my universal health care policy.
Sorry. Yeah, that's it's like it shouldn't even have to be said. Like it shouldn't even have to say, oh, by the way, when we say universal health care, by the way, we mean dental and vision as well. Like that's also health care.
But Medicare does not cover those things. Medicare only covers a couple of prescriptions and a couple of visits to the doctor. We would be covering with my universal health care, we're covering mind and body, your teeth, your mental health. Mental health is something that we put directly in school systems to make sure that everyone is getting mental health care. So sorry.
Awesome. And the guaranteed housing policy.
Yes. So this one is going to make some people upset, and I'll just go ahead and say it. I would be writing an executive order to use eminent domain, and we would be paying people who currently already own their houses, whatever the eminent domain law is in their county. Now, for people who are like, you can't do that, there is no case that the federal government has ever lost is buying everyone's home in the United States of America, giving the land back to the indigenous tribes that owned that before colonization, allowing them to be the stewards, and people who are in the domicile, the physical building, would remain or relocate. And when I say relocate, like people move, your family grows, you would use an app like Airbnb, you would log into it, you would select where you want to live, and you would live there for a minimum of 6 months or wherever. If you don't want to move, you don't have to move. You could die right where you are. But this is going to make sure that we can upgrade everyone's housing, stop charging people to live, and provide shelter for everyone within our borders. No one would pay rent. No one would pay mortgage. You already pay your taxes, so it covers it. There are more houses on the market than there are houses. Go ahead.
What if you already own the house? What if you've already paid your house off?
We're paying. Yeah. We pay you the money that you would get back under the eminent domain laws where you live. That is your money to do whatever you want. And then you would stay in your house. The reason we know that it will work is because we're not requiring anyone to move. We're not kicking you out of your home, and we're paying you back for the money you invested. This allows us to take every single person off the street. And it's already working in other countries, more Slavic countries.
So I think I'm a little bit confused just because does this mean that people, when you say the land would be given to someone else, so then
the indigenous community. So if you bought a stolen car,
right.
So I think what this I'm sorry. This requires you to have an understanding of how land back works, right? There is a movement within the indigenous community in the United States to get land back. We would give them their land back. If you bought a stolen car, the police would come and tell you you can't keep that car, right? We're not displacing you. You're not removed from the home, but you are not going to be able to pour toxic chemicals down your driveway anymore. If your house needs to be upgraded, you would contact us and it would be done for you. This is the easiest way to make sure that everyone has housing and good quality housing, not putting people in projects. Houses are paid off,
Well,
and yes, it does eliminate property taxes. No more property taxes.
how would you prevent companies like BlackRock who have bought up a lot of these homes?
Now that's different. They're not individual people, so the law doesn't require me to treat them the same. They owe us money. And I will use my triple bottom line accounting policy when you get to it, because we're going back 37 years to get our money. Yeah. So corporations are going to pay what they owe the American public. Since Reagan, they have had too much fun at our expense.
I hear you on that one. Accessible medical equipment, service dogs in the States.
Yes, people who are disabled do not get a service dog. It takes too long.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just to make sure that we provide for them. It also means that we have to treat animals better. Sentient beings are no longer going to be subjected to corporal punishment.
Yeah, this is another service that's really hard to get, you guys. Like, it's not easy to get a service dog, just FYI. I know other people that have tried to get them, and it's a big thing. Reparations policy, 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's happening with the reparations policy, if you match the phenotype and genotype of people who were slaves on this land, you will have the ability to get $192,000. It's paid out in $4,000 increments. The money doesn't come from taxes. The money comes from decriminalization and cannabis sales, which is covered under your universal health care policy. So as long as you eat them treats and smoke them smokes, you will be helping to pay for the atrocities that this country has never answered for. We will also be providing people with their genealogy. I don't know where I'm descended from. And I don't mean 23andMe. There is actually something far more better that is produced on the continent of Africa to tell people where they're from. We would also be providing plantations. We would be turning those into communities for people who are descended as well.
What about land in reference to Adas
The
group?
land's
What
not
about
ours.
land? The land's not ours?
Nope, land is not ours. It goes back to goes back to the indigenous community. It was theirs first before colonization.
Some people might disagree with I'm just like, some people might disagree because of the Black Wall
So
Street.
I want to be clear. Like, I want to be clear, right? My whole platform could potentially get me killed. I'm talking about giving away housing. I'm talking about giving away healthcare. I am following a different pattern of getting on ballots, which I am successful at. Everything I'm doing, people are going to have pushback. You either want the status quo or you don't. What we are doing with the way that we are campaigning is we are not trying to talk to people who are actually already vote. We are tackling the population that does not vote. We are tackling the population that is poor. We are tackling those people. And those people care more about getting their needs met because they don't own anything. If you look at the data, only 46% of Americans actually own their homes.
Yeah.
4% free and clear. And if you mess up and don't pay your property taxes, you won't own anything. So I feel like, and the older generation really, really liked owning land, right? Because that's all the police protect is property, but it was stolen and we have to give it back. In regard to Black Wall Street, we still were not indigenous to this nation, right? It wasn't ours. It was stolen. The Tulsa Massacre, all of those things that happened, atrocities. But that land was stolen property. It isn't saying you can't live on it, but people actually just need to learn more about the indigenous community and learn what land back means. It isn't something that hurts us. It's actually something that's going to protect our environment and give us a better way of living. Right now in the United States, we don't have fruit producing trees, right? We have an entire huge pollen problem because we don't have fruit producing trees, right? Those types of things could be prevented with land back. We can start fixing our concrete jungles and turning them into vertical jungles.
Yeah, I know one of the big the way the land has been misused and abused. We talked about the pipelines on the show that have been put through multiple communities. So it's a big issue. And then of course, universal basic income. I see
Yes,
two
if you click
thousand
in that, people.
dollars.
No, you should click in that. That's just explaining to you how the math works. So if you click in that, you can see everybody's state. You can see what people in Boston would get. I know Hawaii gets like $4,000, and the state that gets the least is Mississippi because it's like the poorest. And this is just how the math is worked out for people that
Oh,
live in
yeah.
Massachusetts. Hmm.
I see what you mean because it's based on that makes sense. That makes sense. So you guys notice it's higher in some other states because the cost of living in.
Correct. Correct.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. And the other one I wanted to go to is foreign policy. This is a big one with a lot of people that watch this show. What's your position in reference to foreign policy and war and imperialism?
I don't have time for imperialism. I got to fix America. And I'm only going to give you guys one term. So just to be true, right? My foreign policy is a lot close to what the Swiss have. America will be exporting doctors, we'll be exporting medicine, we'll even export food. We are not sending checks and we are not sending weapons. We are no longer propping that up. We will be closing all of the bases around the world as part of a renegotiation for all of our trade deals. We must come into the global market as not a white supremacist superpower, but as a group of people that want to work with our global community. I'm not talking isolationism. What I'm talking about is we're going to stop putting our nose where we don't belong. We're going to fix our problems at home. We're going to bring our troops back. Should somebody do something to us in the US, I have no problem raining bombs and terror and fighting. I've been fighting all my life. That's not an issue. But we don't need to be there starting shit. We need to be here fixing our country.
Interesting. And triple bottom line accounting policy.
Yes, that's what I was talking about, how I'm gonna get my money from companies like BlackRock. And I don't just mean my money, I mean y'all money. But that's how we are going to get your money back. The companies only care about their bottom line. They only care about their profit. But now their profit is how many per workers did you hurt? Amazon owes us a bunch of money. They killed 6 people a couple years ago and letting people go home in a tornado. They didn't pay, they didn't get shut down. Nothing happened to them. Nobody went to jail. They just sent them a $20,000 check and they let it go. So that would be something that would hurt their bottom line. We would also, are you doing damage to the environment? We are going to chalk that up on your bill as well. That's how we do it. And that explains it. And we're going back 37 years.
Immigration.
We need to go back to a policy. If you want to be here, I want you to be here. This is stolen land, stolen people. We don't have time to keep people out. If they want to be here, I want them to be here. We used to process people on Ellis Island in 7 hours. We could do it in 1.
How would you deal with the issue in reference to immigration, in reference to the immigration process, like how long it takes for someone to even become a citizen in this country?
No. An hour. When it was white people immigrating, it took 7 hours. They got the name changed and they went through. If they were sick, they were held on Ellis Island until sickness was gone. But that's it. You get a doctor's visit, make sure you're healthy, you get your paperwork, and then you go on about your business, and we give you housing. This does not have to be that complicated. It's only complicated when we want to be greedy, hateful, and bigots.
All right. Death penalty policy.
Yeah, so we would put you to death in 365 days. I'm not a pacifist.
No, I'm sorry. The death penalty policy. What do you mean? Are you for or?
I'm for death penalty. If you harm people, we need to eliminate you. I am for abolishing prisons, but let me explain. So I personally have been in 3 mass shootings. I've been shot twice. Anybody who will go into a crowd of people with a weapon and open fire, they don't need to be amongst us. I do not have any sympathy for that. And I would say that not everybody has to agree with all the candidates on every issue that they have. The death penalty isn't going away under any of the other current candidates.
But what happens if you're abolishing the police? Who makes this decision whether or not someone's going to
Your
be put to
community.
death?
So you would need to read the restorative justice policy that's in the Abolish Police policy. It is all in there.
And what if it's someone that's actually not guilty?
So it's not. So we have tons of people who are sitting in jail because of our current systemic racist process. It isn't going to work like that. We switch to a restorative justice. Your community is not going to execute you on site. You would actually have to be proven guilty. There would actually have to be DNA. There would actually have to be, like, there is not going to be any reasonable doubt. This is really to deter mass shooters and serial killers.
But there have been cases
so if you don't want the death
where, right, but my thing is there's been cases before where people have been proven guilty only to find out that they were innocent 30 and 40 years later after they sat in jail.
So so I would again talk about, you're comparing it to the flawed system that we have. When people were sitting in jail, we ignored evidence. We didn't test evidence, right? People are exonerated because we finally got around to testing their DNA. I'm not saying eliminate anybody before we know that they're guilty. I'm not saying it happens tomorrow, but there does need to be a deterrent for the gun violence that we have in this country.
Okay. So here's the problem in reference to the DNA. DNA testing we were doing DNA testing in the 90s. And since the 90s, there have still been people that were wrongfully convicted. So that's why I'm asking, what about the people who are wrongfully convicted?
But they're wrongfully convicted under the current way that the justice system works. If you read the policy, it does not work anything like that anymore. Like, we're not using judges, we're not using federal courthouses. Like, it doesn't work like that anymore. You would actually have to read into it.
Right, but why does the community get to decide whether or not someone gets to live or die? What happened to restorative justice?
It is restorative justice, but it does leave the opportunity. I'm not saying that, I'm saying it's still on the table. But if we live in a society where you're not paying rent, you're not paying for your healthcare, you're not paying for, you have access to healthcare, like universal healthcare, you have access to mental health, and you still want to pull out weapons and harm people, you are a danger to society.
I do not agree with this policy. I'm just being 100%, because I can see this.
You are allowed to not. You are allowed to not agree with it. I don't think that I'm trying to force anyone to agree with it. I'm just telling you what the policy is. I talk to people who don't agree with the universal healthcare policy.
Yeah, but there's a difference between agreeing with universal healthcare and saying someone should die. Like, I think, there's a difference between that and the eye for an eye. I personally don't believe that we should decide whether or not, someone needs to be put to death.
And I respect your opinion on that.
Okay, so one other thing I want to get to, because there's a lot of them here, but I do want to get to the education policy. And then I also want to ask you about your stance on abortion as well. The education policy, how do you see, what is your vision for education in this country?
So a Montessori education that includes actual trade education and traditional, like, not sitting in a desk education, but like, so you could go to be a doctor or a scientist. Both of those things need to be available to all children. So it's an expanded policy, but it does include free college as well.
Right. So I don't know if every state has this, but in Massachusetts we do have Montessori schools, and they are highly respected. So it's great to give children that, to give them.
So in around the country, they're not everywhere, and it doesn't have access. And so what I'm saying is we would be converting the way children go into a classroom and they sit there for 8 hours a day. Federally would be paying for it. So all schools would be converted to Montessori schools to provide children with that education. All classrooms would be smaller than 18 students. All classrooms would have actually 2 teachers. And everyone who works in the education industry will be getting a raise.
Okay, the question that I have is abortion. So this is a hot topic. Obviously, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. How do you feel that issue should be handled?
I believe in a person's right to choose. One of my executive orders on the first day will be to codify Roe, like codify an individual's right to choose. Like actually make sure that's something that's not going to be able to be adjusted.
Okay, so and to make it so that the Supreme Court could not overturn that again in the future.
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
But we also need to expand the Supreme Court as well.
Why do you feel we should expand the Supreme Court?
Because I have legislation I need to push through and I can legally do it, and that's how I'm going to get it done.
Okay, so two more questions. One of the questions I have is, I know some of these policies you would like to do through executive order. For the policies that cost money, it would need to receive the approval of Congress. So how would you get some of these policies approved in Congress?
So we need we have to trigger new elections. So my first two executive orders is an age cap, 65, and then term limits. That's going to make sure that anybody who's been there too long, they're not there. So that way you can get Congress people that actually want to vote for these things.
Interesting. And then last but not least,
you also need a new constitution.
A new constitution.
We need to push for a new constitution that actually protects everyone.
And then in reference to funding for your campaign, is this going to be a grassroots campaign, or will you swear off, for example, will you swear off corporate donations?
Yes. So yeah, corporations aren't donating to me. What we've been doing is going around raising the money, selling fried chicken. My campaign bus, we've gone to 4 cities so far. The bus, we had an issue with the bus. We got into an accident. So the bus is in the shop. So that's why we're home this week. But we've been on the road for the last few weeks. We continue to go around the country. We're raising the money ourselves. It costs $300,000 to get on all the ballots. So far, we've successfully achieved ballot access in 7 states. The issue here is not all the candidate portals are open. But once we are, I'm earning the money to get on the ballot. I don't need to take crazy bribes. It only costs $300,000 to run for president, $200,000 to pay my staff. We can make that money ourselves.
Well, you have your math down. Jasmine, one more question. Have you talked to or have you connected with Dr. West in any way, shape, or form?
We contacted Dr. West as soon as he announced to schedule a debate and a sit down. No response. We contacted Afro Man as soon as we've contacted everybody. My campaign, because of how polling goes for debates, this was before the DNC has decided that they weren't going to do debates. We already knew that the GOP has pulled out of the debate process. So what we have done is contacted every candidate that is running to schedule a debate. Some have accepted and we've done that, and some have not.
That's interesting. But I have not heard from Afro Man either, if it makes you feel better.
We're gonna keep trying. We're gonna keep trying.
Afro Man hasn't responded to me either, Jasmine. So you can join the club. Oh man. Well, Jasmine, thank you so much.
What I will tell anybody that is listening, though, because I know you said.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I see a lot of people in your comment section that said that they have questions. I have the availability on my website that people can schedule meetings to talk to me directly. You can yell at me. You can say whatever you got to say. I'm willing to listen to you. You get 30 minutes. This is how we fix what's going on in America. It is listening to other Americans. So if people have questions, I saw somebody said, what do you mean we don't have fruit producing trees? They're hurting my head. We do not have fruit producing trees on the street. You'd have to go to a grocery store to acquire your fruit. So in other countries, people can just walk up to a fruit tree and grab the fruit and eat it and keep going. That's why starvation in other countries is very different than starving here in America. So for people who do have questions, please contact me. We will schedule a meeting. I will talk to you and anything you want to say to me. I even saw somebody that wanted to know about MMT, so they can schedule a meeting to talk to me about that if they are interested.
All right, Jasmine, thank you so much. Guys, go to Jasmine's website if you want to ask her questions. She's here to talk to you. So definitely check out her site. And Jasmine, good luck.
Thank you so much.